I'm Lieutenant Navy retired Andrew MacGillivray. I am a 12-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces and Royal Canadian Navy. I retired from the military in August of 2021. I'm also a founding member of the Veterans for Freedom organization. This is the first part of a two-part series titled Canada Divided, and the second part of the series will be called Canada United. I thought of this concept when I was supporting the truckers in Ottawa earlier in the year. It has evolved a fair bit since conception, and I've had a lot of input and help from my fellow veterans in putting this together, so I'd like to thank them for their time. So this video is made specifically for Canada. However, it can be applied to other democratic and Western countries. The board here shows the lay of the land. This is often considered to be a culture or information war that most Western countries are facing right now. The units of this war are broadly divided amongst these lines, and there's 5 total. I'm going to be using a fair bit of military jargon, and that stems from my previous life. So what we have here are the 5 units of our information or culture war. First, we have the elites, and they make up 1% of our population. They can also be referred to as the ruling class, the establishment, the globalists, authoritarians, the statists, or the liberal world order. The second unit we have is what we call the technocrats, and they make up about 4% of the population. They consist of the media, so that's either mainstream media or the government-funded media, corporate leadership, academia, so schools, universities, colleges, etc., the 3- and 4-letter agencies such as CSIS or the RCMP, and bureaucrats. And those bureaucrats are elected officials at all 3 levels of government. The third unit on the battlefield is what we call the progressive left, and they make up about 20% of the country's population. They are often considered, or often called, the woke mob, social justice warriors. They're usually ultra compliant. Some people call them the hive mind. Some people have called them the Borg Collective for those Star Trek fans, but they're often considered as well to be bullies. Now, what they have is something called Antifa, which is a very small portion of the actual 20%. And Antifa are often referred to as the shock troops, the brown shirts, and they are often considered the violent wing of the progressive left. What we have here is the working class. So they make up approximately 65% of our country's population. They can be called the middle class, your average Canadian citizen, and they are often disengaged from what's happening in our country, and they just want to live their lives and be left alone and provide for their families, etc. And then lastly, here we have the patriots, okay, and they make up about 10% of our country's population. So they are awake, they are engaged, they're often anti-woke, they are individualists, and they're often called conspiracy theorists, which is accurate. However, there's a spectrum of conspiracy theorists, and we won't dive into that for this presentation. As well, they're made up of the independent media, okay? Now, they also have a violent wing, and they're often referred to as militias or sovereign citizens. Okay, now the difference between the 2 sort of violent wings of each group is with Antifa, what they do is they bring violence to towns and cities, and they intimidate and they, break windows and that sort of thing. And the violent, militia or sovereign citizens, they often just want to be left alone. And that's the difference between those 2 units of this battlefield. I'm going to start with talking about the tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, of the technocrats. Okay, we're going to start with the media. So mainstream media or government-funded media have broken away from telling the truth. In a recent poll, they said that 42% of Canadians have trust in the legacy media. It's the lowest ever, and it is continuing to drop. And that stems from them breaking away from telling the truth and starting to push a narrative, which is being pushed on them by the bureaucrats. Also, corporate leadership. So they are beholden to their shareholders, as well as two large companies called BlackRock and Vanguard, who often are shareholders but have a huge stake in a lot of these multinational corporations. And they're often very narcissistic, which means they have a inflated sense of self-worth. Academia, so schools, universities, and college. Again, they are subsidized by tax dollars, and they have, to get those tax dollars, they have to apply diversity, inclusion, and equity practices into their curriculum, or DI. That's what I'm going to refer to them from here on in as DI. And that is what is being pumped into young people of our country's brains, and they become activists, and that's what fuels the progressive left. Also, what all of the technocrats do is they force a hypothetical utopia onto the progressive left with the promises of never having to work and everything being taken care of. And it's that promise of that utopia that keeps the progressive left in line. Now, in terms of resources, the technocrats actually have unlimited resources. These multinational corporations, the government uses our tax dollars to subsidize and fund the technocrats, and they have immense power and immense pull within the battlefield to force their narratives and to force what they are trying to achieve onto the rest of us. So your average Canadian, well, it's the progressive left, the middle class, and the patriots. Now, one of the things that technocrats do in terms of TTPs, again, tactics, techniques, and procedures, is they have the ability to draft and enforce legislation. For example, Bill C-11. They also have the ability to create organizations and networks, such as the Anti-Hate Network, which is a government-funded hate network, in my opinion. And they use these tools to push censorship down onto the patriots. So they use bills, they use their resources, and they use social media and the 3 and 4 letter agencies to push censorship onto the patriots, onto the working class, because they want to be the arbiters of truth, or the ministry of truth, which we all know where that came from. And those are some of the tools they have in their toolbox of how to push and divide us all and have us fight amongst ourselves. Next, I'm going to talk about the progressive left, or the woke mob. So I know it's hard, but you have to have empathy for these people. They've been brainwashed into this progressive activism that we are seeing, and they're not living in reality. And that's why they're often referred to as they're living in a clown world, or like I mentioned earlier, the hypothetical utopia, where they think that men are women, where everyone's a victim, all white people are bad, etc. Now, they use social media as their force multiplier. So what they do is there's something called sock puppets, or sock puppet accounts. So you can essentially have one person, part of the progressive left, who can control up to probably 1,000 social media accounts that aren't all bots. And that is where they implement their TTPs, which is fear, intimidation, doxing, and cancel culture. And with the use of social media, they're actually constant. So this is something where you have the social justice warriors or keyboard warriors, and they patrol the internet looking for people who speak out of turn, and then they threaten them, they dox them. These people lose their jobs or their lives, and they attempt to scare them into compliance. And it's actually pretty sad because Canadians are generally good people. And what's happened is through the technocrats and academia, these people have turned into these progressive activists. And just like most bullies, what happens is that if you challenge them or you push back at all, or you scratch below the surface, there's nothing there. So the progressive left have actually been trained, again through academia, that if they're challenged, they are to get triggered, they are to run to their safe space, which is an echo chamber, and that's where they're going to cry, victim, I'm a victim. Look what's happened, someone challenged me. Look, they're hateful, they're Nazis, they're fascist, like whatever the usual Marxist bag of tricks that they use, and insults and racists and stuff like that. And then once they've calmed down and they've been comforted by their, fellow members of the hive mind, they get right back into the social justice aspect of things. So what they do with for their TTPs is they use emotional manipulation, they use gaslighting, and basically they put a cloud of fear and intimidation over the working class, the patriots, and they actually do it amongst themselves. So they police each other, and if anyone decides to step out from that cloud, they will cancel themselves. So that is, it's very intimidating, and a lot of people in these areas here are afraid to speak up, even though that they know something is wrong. So what this leads to is something we call emotional deranged sophistry, which means they use arguments that are used to deceive. They weaponize words. That's why you can see the corporate leadership of certain dictionaries are always changing the meaning of words that had the same meaning for hundreds of years. So word weaponization is another TTP that they use. Also, what they do is they aim to discredit anyone in the working class and any of the patriots or independent media. And so they'll tar and feather them. And then they will use their sock puppet accounts, and they will use bots to pile on to any sort of dissenters or anyone who speaks out against them. Next, I'm going to talk about the patriots and their TTPs. So the patriots have very limited resources. The independent media gets no government funding. They don't usually get a lot of the big name advertisers, and they're often crowdfunded. So examples of independent media would be Druthers, True North, and there's a bunch of individual people who run media sites, and those are, or citizen journalists is another way to describe them, and they are small independent media sites. Now, for the battle here is for the working class. So that middle 65%, we have that number at, okay? So what the patriots do is they use something, a term we use in the military called the hearts and minds strategy. We use that when we're going overseas. And we do that through having civil conversation, constructive conversation, and we tell the truth. So it takes longer for us, the patriots, to win over the working class because it's not done instantly through fear or threats, and it's done through having that conversation, talking about truth, writing articles, listening to podcasts, etc. So it takes longer, but then once you've won them over, you've actually forged that friendship, and it's harder to break than it is fear, which can be very easy to break. So the battle is here. It's for that middle 65% of people who are often disengaged. So what the patriots are trying to do is to wake these people up using truth and to bring them over to their side. Now, the difficulty there, again, is time to spend and have conversations with them, but also, again, resources, right? So again, it goes back to money and being, using social media or Rumble or any sort of video site, and actually having the threat of being canceled, like losing an Instagram or Facebook or YouTube channel because you're going against this narrative here, which again, the corporate leadership, so some of the worst corporate leadership, as we all know, is big tech and social media. So if you're waking too many people up here, they will find an excuse to shut you down. And so you see a lot of it where people talk about parallel economies and different independent social media sites, etc. It's a bit of a hard task to get people to sign up for that. Again, it ties back to limited resources. So one thing to remember in all of this is that courage will always triumph over fear. That is why you're seeing a lot of veterans who are in the patriotic part of the battlefield. We're not afraid. We are not afraid of the technocrats. We are not afraid of the progressive left. And courage is contagious. So once we wake up more of the working class, it has a ripple effect. They will show courage. Then they will have their neighbors, their friends, their family show courage, and they will push back against the progressive left until they've either won them over or that these people have been outed and they have no impact on the battlefield any longer. So in our next video, we're going to show you how to get from Canada divided to Canada united. And it has to do with one thing, okay? Is the Patriots, once we get big enough, we will put what my army brethren like to say is we will put a breach in the line. And we'll do that by installing patriotic bureaucrats in all levels of government and empowering your average Canadian citizen, your patriot, into getting involved in the community, getting involved in the democratic process. And once we've breached into here with the bureaucrats, those elected officials will then be able to take on the rest of the technocrats and the elites, and then we can focus on fixing Canada and uniting our country. I'd like to thank you for your time.